All right, welcome back for the final go through. We're going to take a look at just a couple of chapters here, and then we're going to finish up. There's 16 in total, but as I said, there's some that I don't use. There are some that I don't think that are that well put together. Sometimes some of these chapters seem to be just slapped together, such as chapter 13. And I'll show you what I mean. And then other times there are chapters that I just don't use. I don't find them useful or instructive for my purposes or for my coaching purposes. But nevertheless, this is about 80% gold. At least 80% of this book is gold. There's some great insights and techniques and philosophies in here. So it's definitely worth a go through. And I've been through this multiple times. So this is about leadership. And there's a little blurb here before she gets into Ching-Ning's text, which is basically, that's all it is for the majority of the chapter. She states, Ching-Ning Chu states, each one of us in large or small ways are leaders. And that's a point that ever since I read that, I thought about that, and I said that is true. Unless you're on an island, a castaway all by yourself on an island, you live in a tree in Montana or out in the hills somewhere all by yourself in total seclusion, there's always people around, right? You grow up, you most likely have brothers and sisters or family or parents or friends or classmates or people you work with, right? So you are always there in a potential leadership role. Whether or not you use it in that capacity is up to you, but the potential, at least it says here, each one of us in large or small ways are leaders. The potential to be there, as long as there's one person around, the potential to be a leader is there, right? Some have an official title for their roles, leaders, while others may lead their brothers, sisters, or friends, as I said, on the playground. Leadership is a state of mind, what you do to yourself, not what you do to others, and that's the key points. And that's why my company is called Inner Projection. It's not called Outward Projection Inward. Recently, many Americans have been voicing discontent about our present political system. And this was written not recently, probably it's at least 30 years old, if I recall correctly. Americans are always voicing discontent with the present political system. Since I've been alive, people have complained. The problem is not so much that the system needs reform, I think it does, but more importantly, we desperately need to overhaul the standards of integrity among our political leaders. It's not going to happen. A nation, a corporation, a small business, or a family's well-being is greatly, I would guess that's greatly intertwined with the quality of its leaders. The chance for that happening, you would probably have to be put into a position of power, such as maybe the president of the United States, and put your foot down and say, we're not going to do this, that, and so forth anymore. We're going to run a clean ship here. But then the problem is that there's existing elements that have been in power. Some might call it the deep state or the administrative state that has been in power for quite some time. Oftentimes, the new president coming in may be somewhat of a figurehead because of the fact that an existing system has been in place for quite some time. And if you look, especially if you look at the executive branch, there are literally thousands of employees that work under the executive branch, hundreds of departments and sub-departments. So the new president coming in, oftentimes it's stated that the new president coming in actually has to sign on to an existing situation, right? Occasionally there have been, and it's very occasionally there have been presidents who have really stepped outside of the status quo and that existing power structure, and actually done something a little extraordinary, out of the ordinary. But most of the time they're just adhering to the existing system. If you don't know that, do some reading. A nation, a corporation, small business, or a family's well-being is greatly intertwined with the quality of its leaders. The ancient Chinese were convinced that the quality of their leaders was directly related to national survival. A lot of truth in that. In many ancient art of war books, the code of leadership has been addressed. And of course, that's where the Kung-Ming's Art of War comes in. Kung-Ming, who was mentioned in an earlier chapter, is considered to be the greatest leader to have lived during the 5,000 years of recorded Chinese history. His book, which is relatively unknown to Western leaders, that would be me. Well, not a leader, but Western person, defines in detail what constitutes a great leader and a poor leader. Kung-Ming's description of a great leader shows a great deal of similarity to a thick-faced black heart practitioner. The ancient Chinese always placed tremendous value on their leaders' spiritual and philosophical merit. Even today, the Chinese place virtue over technical ability when evaluating a corporation employee or government official. A person with great, and that's actually I don't know how true that is. China is a communist state. It has a capitalist economic system, but it's politically the Marxist communist state. So I don't know how true that is. Anyways, it's complex, as they say. A person with great abilities who lacks of spiritual depth will not be a benefit to his organization, but will be a threat to himself and others. People will naturally follow a person who possesses strong spiritual qualities in addition to his professional aptitude. And I think that has to do more with smaller entities. Once you get into larger entities, such as the federal administrative state or corporations or, large entities, organizations, business, finance, education, whatever. Those organizations are, like, for instance, education, basically run by unions. Sad to say. So I think this is probably more applicable to most people in a smaller capacity, more of a micro than a macro application. As the Chinese are fond of saying, for a worthy leader, one will walk across boiling oil and raging fire to support his leader's objective. And that is a Asian philosophy, greatly so. That the individual basically, you think of the Japanese kamikaze pilot or the leader who commits hara-kiri after doing a poor job or losing battle or war. That's not so much of a mindset in Western areas, established Western areas. Kung-Ming's book is intended for military use. However, the principles, and that's what I'm talking about here, which guide the ancient military leaders, are interchangeable and so forth, right? So she's got, here's, power and responsibility, uproot the wicked. So this is just a listing of Kung-Ming's principles. And some of it may be applicable to directly or indirectly to non-military situations or scenarios, but I've read through this and there's some merit and interest in reading through this, but I don't find reading lists, an itemized list of principles or leadership principles of great value. I mean, there's certainly good stuff in there, worth a look through. So I'm going to finish up with Thick Within, Black Within, and we'll call it a day. We'll call it a book. We'll call it a series of videos on a book. You cannot obtain what you already have. The secret of how to obtain the state of thick-faced black heart, that there's nothing to obtain because it's already in your natural state, right? You cannot obtain anything that you already have. So this is something that she has mentioned at the outset, and she's bringing it up again in the conclusion, because when you wrap things up as a concluder, you want to bring any points home, re-establish them or restate them maybe in a slightly different way. It's kind of the why of your whole book or essay or whatever it is that you're writing, right? Chapter, book, essay. So that's a huge part of the why, right? The fact that this thick-faced black heart is a natural state. It's in us, it's innate, right? I noticed that. I've had clients and former students who have brought up this point, that they were familiar with what was being spoken to here. Some had just come to it. Some had come to it some time ago. I had come to these principles or concepts years, maybe 10 years, and had been practicing them unknowingly without detailed descriptions or labels or definitions, which really help when you're trying to analyze a concept, right? Or a philosophy. So when I read this, I probably 70–80% of it at least, I'm going, yes, 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 I know that, I know that, I know that, yes, I've experienced that, right? So that's why I found it of such great value. And my students and my clients also have echoed the same thing for years, 10 years or more now. As a tiger need not learn how to be fierce, the ocean need not learn how to be oceanic. The fire burns the forest without asking, how do I burn? So human beings need not take lessons on how to be natural beings. Our Maker has implemented the perfect intelligence inherently within the essence of all things. And what does that mean? Some might call that the Spirit, the Holy Ghost, if you're a religious person, especially a Christian. But others might call it natural instinct. Maybe if you're a Darwinian, natural instinct. Maybe you call it gut instinct. What are the other terms for it? Intuition. Einstein talked about intuition, this very concept. He said without intuition, there is nothing, right? Because you can acquire knowledge and understanding. You can read books, you can go to lectures, and so forth. You can acquire existing knowledge, facts, data, understanding, but the true solutions, real solutions, come from a creative leap. Where, for instance, Einstein's theory of relativity, where did that come from? How come he was the only one that came up with it? Well, he had to create a connection, right? He had to come up with a leap of logic. There was no existing theory of relativity, so he had to create it. And he says that anything that has been created has existed in the mind or outside of the being. Where does, like, for instance, when people create, artists talk about this, songwriters and playwrights and so forth, talk about the fact that they seem to be just a conduit, that the knowledge, the source, the poem, the play, the song, whatever, comes through them. It's coming from another source. It just comes through them. And I've felt the same thing when writing a poem or writing a short story or a book or whatever. It's a very interesting concept. So this is what Einstein is talking about when he's talking about intuition. And and everything that has ever existed, he said, basically comes through intuition. It exists in the mind. The couch, the computer, the iPhone, the democratic state, or the constitutional republic as we know it more accurately, right? United States, the first great democratic constitutional republic experiment, if you will. So most things are not there, right? They exist in the mind. Sometimes they come to the mind just as a eureka or a leap in logic, right? A leap over logic to some new insight, right? Blessing and cursing of free will. I am able to love my God because he gives me freedom to deny him. That's an interesting concept, right? Each human being is fully embodied, but with free will, total and complete divine intelligence imparted by our Maker. And again, if you don't want to say divine or Maker, you can just say universe, scientific entity, empirical knowledge. I don't know, something outside of the divine or the religious. To use as we see fit in fulfilling our highest good. Through our free will, topped with a healthy dose of ignorance and confusion, we often handle our lives like a blind man driving an automobile. That actually happened. That was in The Scent of a Woman, where the lead character, I can't remember the actor's name, is a blind man. He's a blind colonel. He's going to commit suicide. He's had a terrible life. He's ended up blinding himself with a hand grenade accidentally. He was drunk. And he realized, after some time that he didn't have a life. He was just miserable. He was going to take his life. And a young man was to just watch over him for the 2 days, but he ended up saving his life. And that's the great part of the story. He survives and thrives, but because this young man of maybe 18, 19 befriends him and is very courageous and doesn't know much as far as the world or being worldly is concerned. And this colonel, this hardened colonel, maybe in his mid-50s or early 60s or so, decides he's going to end it all, and the kid stops him, grabs the gun, tries to pull it from him, and the colonel's pointing at him, and the kid's yelling, "Go ahead, kill me, shoot me, do it, do it. You don't want to do it. You don't want to die. You don't want to kill me." It was really cool seeing sentiment. But anyways, and he ends up at one point, he starts doing crazy stuff. He ends up driving a sports car, high-end sports car, and the kids, kind of off the beaten trail, in the back alleys of New York, I think it is. And the kid kind of guides them. I'm way off topic. The gift of free will that our Maker has bestowed upon each of us is the greatest blessing as well as the greatest curse. 7 stages of unfolding, right? So you've got these stages of unfolding, which I'm not going to go through in minute detail. We'll just take a brief look at each one. The desire to do right? That's where you start. And this is the 7 stages of self-unfoldment, right? So you're really beginning to tap into the inner self, and you start with the good part, right? Like Spike Lee, you do the right thing, right? And this is, even though this is often described by the author as a neutral tool, it's kind of like money. Money itself is not evil. It's really money just magnifies the basic nature of the person who has the money. If you become wealthy and you're a jerk, that being a jerk or evil or selfish, whatever, will be magnified. And if you're a good person, that will be magnified as well. So here, hopefully, the author is trying to guide the thick-faced black heart practitioner, start them off on the right foot, the desire to do the right, right? You feel an intense desire to do good, to do the right thing, and so forth, right? At this stage, you also feel helpless. How do I do the right thing? Confusion and negativity. Eventually, you begin to gain sight up to the point you think you have been making a noble sacrifice, when in fact you have not been sacrificing at all. Rather, you have been denying and depriving yourself, afraid to acknowledge your needs, right? So this is kind of relating back to chapter 2, which is an unlearning of notions or ideas or principles, life principles and concepts that have been put in place, maybe by not, people, family, friends, and lesser known, not intimates or lesser known people. Maybe you're influenced by well-known people outside of family and friends. But, notions are put into your head by what you hear, by what you listen, by what you read, that are not always accurate. They're not always the best thing for you. So you have to unlearn these things. Some are good, some are bad, right? But first of all, you have to become aware, self-aware. Isn't this is about self-awareness? So the second chapter is about becoming self-aware of the fact that even though you believe certain notions are right or just, or the way to go, the way to believe, the way to function, the way to walk in life, right? You realize that if you take a closer look, a more objective, you stand back. In critical thinking, I talk about floating above the fray, right? In critical thinking, you really have to get out of the notion that, the popular notion, that just because something is popular doesn't mean it's a good idea, right? Slavery in this country was a popular notion at one time. The oppression of minorities at one time in this country was believed as a good notion. The oppression of women inferior or second-class citizens, was a popular notion at one time, right? So these notions that were popular, just because they're popular, doesn't mean that they're good notions. Or just because they're seen as negative, may not mean that they're bad notions, right? So you really have to begin to see things clearly. And it really begins with an unlearning, a stepping away from the preconceived notions and norms of the political class or culture or society or religion or your family or books you've read or artists you've been exposed to, politicians, political mindset, political parties, blah, 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 right? You really have to pull yourself away from those things. Unstick yourself from a very subjective kind of stuck in the sauce, or I kind of look at it along the lines of flypaper, right? You're grounded in flypaper, and it's that very groundedness, if that's such a word, that may end up doing you harm. flypaper is there to get your feet stuck so that, you know, you're a fly, you end up dying, right? So you really, it's, when I did this and other people have done this and talked about it, even people I don't know, I've read about people doing this, or clients doing this or students doing this. It's amazing how your mind opens up to the truth, to what's really there, right? Before you are a son, daughter, husband, employee, executive, politician, entrepreneur, lawyer, policeman, you are a human who possesses a natural and basic human needs. By ignoring your individual needs and totally catering to the needs of others, in accordance to the role you are playing, keyword role, right? You have betrayed your inner nature and sacrificed your well-being. In fact, you have victimized yourself through self-denial. This was done under the noble pretense of self-sacrifice. You begin to feel anger and resentment, and at the same time you feel guilty. It kind of reminds me of the Matrix, a metaphor that I've used many times before. And she talks about this too. If you're stuck too long in a mindset, a preconceived notion or mindset that is not healthy for you, the longer you're in it, the harder it is to get yourself out of it or pull out of it, right? So Neo in the Matrix, he's been in the Matrix for some time. He's around 30 years old, and usually Morpheus will say this, you know, in the movie, usually we don't pull people out who are that old. They have a tendency to reject reality, right? And I go, man, that's like thick-faced blackguard, right? So, but they knew that they could make an exception with him because he was the one, you know, he was the great mover and shaker, the chosen one, you know, to come forth and free the people of Zion, to create a Zion, I guess, overcome the machines, right? Anyways, you begin to feel anger, resentment. At the same time, you feel guilty about those despicable emotions, which are unfit for this. I think this is one of the reasons why in critical thinking I talk about this. This is why one of the reasons why people will hang on to their beliefs, whether they're right or wrong, heinously wrong or right, doesn't matter. Especially if I've believed them, and enough people have convinced me to believe them, right? And I've believed them for 10, 15, 20 years or so now. I'm not going to stop believing them, right? And people will go out of their way. They will ignore experts. They will ignore a preponderance of evidence and data and fact put forth by experts. That's almost extensive, exhaustive. And they're fighting against 90%. You know, 90% of experts have said for the last 50, 100 years, XYZ, right? But no, I don't believe that. I believe in the 10%, and I'm not going to deny myself. I'm going to stay in the Matrix. I'm not going to look at the truth. I don't care, right? And it reminds me of Cypher in the Matrix. Cypher is kind of like the Judas, right? He squeals on Neo and gives the codes or whatever he does there. And he's talking to, who is it? Not the Anderson, not Mr. Anderson, but the head agent. I can't think of his name right now. The head agent, and he's saying, I want to be put back into the Matrix. I want to forget the truth. I want to be famous. I want to be something important. I want a lot of money. Well, I want to be an actor, which is ironic because he is an actor, right? Mr. Smith, right? Mr. Smith is the head agent, the evil one, the Satan version, opposite of Neo, the one, the savior, you know, right? So the battle for surrender, you finally reach the conclusion that it's too painful to live your life without the liberty of self-expression, self-nurturing, right? This is so much the Matrix. You cannot contribute to anyone if you cannot contribute to yourself, right? So if you still have pain, if you still have misunderstanding, if you still have confusion inside of you, you can't be good for yourself. You can't be good to anybody, right? So you got to clear that up. It's like a disease. You have a disease, you got to get better, or you're good to know it, right? The pain of living under others' standards has become intolerable. Despicable emotions. Acceptance of your imperfect perfection. You are evolving to the point where you are less judgmental about your anger and resentment. This is kind of like the stages of denial that you go through. You know, you go through anger, you go through denial, you go through resentment, you go through recovery, remorse, acceptance, you know, those basic stages. Yeah. You start to see yourself as an imperfectly perfect. You experience love for your perfection, your imperfections, or the and this is why the Zen Buddhist or the master is telling his students every pancake is perfect. Even if they are imperfect, you have to accept your imperfections. Accept the imperfect and the perfect, and you'll find out that even the imperfect is perfect. You know, kind of like that confusing philosophical concept, right? You begin to be aware that a great courage exists within you, the power of courage that enables you to acknowledge your own existence, your own needs, right? The new possibilities, the inner harmony. By breaking through your notions of other standards and expectations, you find a new surge of inner harmony. Okay? So it's a battle, it's a struggle, it's a giving up, it's a release, it's a newfound perspective, right? The inner harmony. Now you have a newfound perspective, kind of a basic psychological methodology or path, I would guess, right? I'm no psychology expert, but yeah, you watch enough movies, you can kind of figure it out for yourself from a non-expert perspective. Detachment, so if you have the harmony, then the detachment, the highest code of living is detachment. There is no power higher than the power of detachment. When one masters the state of detachment, he becomes the embodiment of dispassion, fearlessness at the stage. Nothing he possesses will possess him, right? So this is when you really, I talked about this before, this is, you start to levitate above it all. Not in a superior sense, somewhat in a superior sense, to be honest, you know, because you're starting to see things for what they really are. You're not allowing preconceived notions or conditionings put in you by culture, society, the mainstream media, politicians, your family, education, whatever, I don't know, religion, you know, wherever they come from, you know, and you're starting to see things clearly, right? And you're really starting to open the Yahweh way. That's another story, right? Carlos Castaneda, the Yahweh way. That's based in Indian priestcraft, I guess you would say, where they would take peyote, right? And they would astral project. You would think, they believe that when they took the peyote, that they would astral project their souls, or their spirit would, you know, fly above them or fly around. You know, was that really happening, or was it just the drugs? Up to you to decide. I'm not saying take drugs. Man's three qualities, tamas, include inertia, obstruction. I'm not going to go into all this. Rajas. I am no expert in this, so I'm not going to go into this in much detail. So you would probably have to find, that's why I'm not going to go into much more detail. I'm going to finish on this chapter because, you know, you would have to find a thick face, black heart expert practitioner. Right? So let's go to the summary of key points. Kind of bring it home, and then we'll end it. Learning the virtues of the four forces: sister water, brother fire, brother wind, mother earth. Little out of my zone. Godlike ego, the only kind of ego worthy of contemplating is kind of ego that their creator possesses. So again, if you're not religious, godlike humility. That's why I'm skipping over this, you know, during my spiritual studies. So again, I mean, it's really up to you. And then the last two, paths to thick face black heart. This is kind of things you can actually do. Where's life's operating manual? Good question. These are actual things you can do to practice thick face black heart. Here we go. Following are a few simple steps for practicing the art of breathing. Right. So this is like meditation. The essence gospel of peace, book 2, Jesus said, we shall wear. So pronounce that word for me. Yeah, so you know, practice breathing, watch your breath. So this is meditation. I don't know if you're interested in meditation. Invoking the inner music, right? Unlocking the inner vision. This is a bit out of the realm of what I use thick face black heart for. I don't do this stuff myself. That's why I'm not gonna talk about it, discuss it, preach it, or any of that stuff, right? And I think that's about it. How the piranha eats the shark, right? So that's it in a nutshell. Again, there's a lot of concepts and principles and ideas, and it's a bit involved. I mean, we're getting close to 400 pages, right, worth of the good stuff. So that's it. I hope this helped. I hope this brought some insight and understanding. I use it more from a non-sectarian approach. I'm a religious person myself, but I don't use this as a religious doctrine. And it's got kind of that religious bent to it. I mean, she grew up in Taiwan and China, a follower of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and then she became a Christian. So there's a lot of religious overtones to what she's talking about. And towards the end there, you get even more into it, right? I'm not going to go down that path. I'm not a Eastern practitioner, and that seems to be with the meditation stuff at the end there. That's where she's heading more and more so into the Western Christian practices, right? So I'll leave it there for you. I just found many of the chapters, there's 16, so I probably found 8, 9, 10 of them really useful and just everyday non-religious applications to understanding the self and how to move forward and to help the self be more successful individually and then also in relationship to other people or other selves, if you will, right? And I found Thick-Faced Blackheart just some aspects of it, many aspects of it, priceless. It's gold. It's really helped me. So this is why I'm passing it on to you. And that's it for Thick-Faced Blackheart. Where we will go next, I'll let you know shortly. Talk soon.